Good afternoon or evening, and welcome. Kensington Senior Living has 7 unique communities located in Virginia, Maryland, and New York, and 3 sister communities located in California. We are truly privileged to support care partners and professionals from coast to coast. Kensington focuses on relationship-based care built on the foundation of our promise to love and care for your family as we do our own. That promise is what initially drew me to become a member of the Kensington family, as my father lived at Kensington in Northern California for over 7 years. It is programs such as the one you are attending now that are so important for us, walking through a caregiver journey to hear from expert professionals like Dr. Wogensen on keeping us current with the latest advances in care management and treatment of conditions that affect seniors and their families. Today, you are in for a treat as Dr. Wogensen shares with us new data and insight with the newly FDA-approved drug for dementia, Leqembi. These changes make the landscape in the fight against Alzheimer's huge. Please join us for the live Q&A following the presentation. All of our registrants from today will receive a copy of today's webinar in your inbox, so please share this important information with your friends and family. Please join me now in welcoming Dr. Wogensen, and thank you so much, Dr. Wogensen. We are thrilled to partner with you as an expert in the field.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. My name is Dr. Ken Wogensen. I'm a neurologist. That's a doctor who studies the brain and the nervous system. And originally, I went to a medical school in Orange County, UC Irvine, and did an internship there too. And then I went down to UC San Diego for neurology, and then up to Stanford for a fellowship. And then I I've been in private practice in Arcadia, which is next to Pasadena, right over the Rose Parade, since 1988. I am involved with many different community activities. I'm currently chief of staff at the local hospital, USC Arcadia, and I'm chief of staff there. But I'm also very much involved and very interested in this particular subject. Maybe I should explain a little bit. So that's who I am. I've been around for a while. When I trained at UC San Diego, we were at the time, that was going back to the 1980s. We were involved in the development of one of the earlier drugs, you may recall of Aricept or donazepam. That was in part developed with research done at UC San Diego at the time that I was there. However, since that time, we've had only basically two medicines to treat the illness of Alzheimer's disease, and those have been Aricept and Namenda, or if you wish the generic names, donazepam and lamantine. And these are basically medicines which raise the levels of neurotransmitters in the brain. I consider them like vitamins for the brain, but they have not really stopped the disease process. They just have made it easier for people to get by in the early stages. It didn't stop the process of the disease. So there was really no effective treatment until now to try to stop this process in these diseases. This is a very exciting time for me because this is the first time we've been able to bring a drug which can actually stop and reverse the signs and symptoms of the Alzheimer's disease. First of all, what is Alzheimer's disease? Well, Alzheimer's disease is a form of dementia. And then you say, well, what's dementia? Well, dementia is like you have, I always use an example of sort of you can understand what people are saying to you, but just can't remember what they said. So the lights are on, nobody's home. Some people, that's another expression for that. Basically, people present new information to you, but you can't make the new memories. And that's because your temporal lobes are deteriorating. Those are the parts of the brain, the temporal lobe, where you make new memories. And people with Alzheimer's disease, the temporal lobes will shrink, become smaller, and actually die out. So the temporal lobes become very small in people with that, and they can't make new memories. They still have the old memories initially. So they can tell you all about where they went to school, how they met their spouse, you know, honeymoon, all that kind of stuff, right, going way, way back. But they can't tell you what they had for breakfast. And that's with the stages of the Alzheimer's disease. So when people talk about dementia, and this is important that we kind of make a distinction here. When I say someone has dementia, it's like you saying somebody drives a car. There are many different types of cars, right? And there are many different forms of dementia. Alzheimer's disease is very specific. It has certain characteristics and affects the temporal lobes in particular. There are other forms of dementia, the dementia you get with multiple strokes, the dementia you get with Parkinson's disease, called Parkinson's dementia complex, Lewy body disease, which is what presents a sort of Parkinsonian features and some memory loss initially. And then Pick's disease. I mean, I could go on and on about all the different forms, frontal temporal dementia. These are different forms. Now, this new medicine is only good for Alzheimer's disease. If you have dementia, which means short-term memory problems and stuff, but it's because you have strokes, it's because you have Pick's disease or one of these others, this medicine will have no effect. You need to understand that. It's very specific, okay? This medicine is very specific for Alzheimer's disease. It doesn't do anything for any of the others, okay? And some people, first thing people say, well, how does it work? Well, the technical terms is it goes and there are special antibodies that attack and remove the neurofibrillary tangles. Now, I'm going to simplify this for you because I like to simplify things in my own life as well. When I was a younger person, when I was in my young years, my parents used to love having what's called a dichondra lawn. I don't know if any of you remember those. There are these lush lawns, beautiful petals to the grass, tons of water, tons of fertilizer. We don't do them now because they soak up so much water. But there was this beautiful green expanse in our front yard, and everybody in our neighborhood was trying to get the best dichondra lawn. Well, my job was to go in there every week or two and pick out all the weeds that were growing. Because, it'd be such a lush environment, you had to pick out the weeds and make sure that the lawn stayed healthy. And the reason I'm saying that is one of the things is I had to do it every week or two. Otherwise, the weeds would start to get too strong and start to take over the lawn. I couldn't just wait 6 months or a year. I had to get right in there every week and pull out those weeds. So that was my job. Now, what's my job now? Well, this new medicine, what it does is it comes in and pulls the weeds out of your brain. Okay, it's like you've got a beautiful brain there and you start to get the weeds in. You start to lose the memory on the early stages. So you go in with this medicine, it's very specific, it goes out and pulls out the weeds. And people say, well, that's kind of interesting. So what happens? So remember, when you're pulling out weeds, you leave little holes behind, right? So this medicine works best when you get in there early when there aren't too many weeds. Like if you lift your lawn and didn't do anything to it for 6 months or a year and then went back to it, it would be all covered in weeds. And when you pulled out all the weeds, there's what's left. You've got this massive area of your lawn just wouldn't look very good, okay? So the concept here is you want to get in early and pull the weeds out before they get established, and you want to keep removing them. So what this medicine does is goes in and pulls out the weeds. Now, what they've specifically said, though, is it works better in the very early stages of the disease. They have demonstrated its effectiveness for this particular study in people with early Alzheimer's. In other words, they have smaller amounts of weeds up there in their brain. And when I say weeds, I mean the neurofibrillary tangles. So if you thought about it, you want to have somebody taking care of your lawn at all times. You don't want to let things build up. So they've come through with this drug for approval of this drug for early stages of Alzheimer's. Now, let's just think about this analogy a little bit. There's a bit of a problem with some people who are on blood thinners, because when you pull out the weeds, if they're on blood thinners already, they have a tendency to bleed into whatever the space you left behind, right? So you're going into the brain, pulling out the weeds. If you're on heavy duty blood thinners, Apixaban, things like that, because you've had pulmonary emboli, or you have a cardiac disease and you've had a valve replaced, there is a strong tendency to bleed into the holes after you've pulled out the weeds. So that's the one big group that it's more dangerous. People say, well, I've heard about strokes from people. Yes, it does happen, but it's almost exclusively in people who are on blood thinners, okay? Or people with bleeding disorders. If you have a form of cancer and you have a bleeding disorder. The other way you can get yourself in trouble is if you're taking a lot of vitamin supplements that happen to be blood thinners. You don't know it, but it's thinning your blood. There are some things that are sort of over the counter that you can take that can thin your blood. So that's another area where you have to talk to your doctors about this. So the ideal patient is a patient early in disease, not too many weeds, and not on blood thinners. So when you pull the weeds out, there'll be less bleeding. Okay, so now we'll say, well, who qualifies, doctor? Well, first of all, you see a neurologist, such as myself, and they make a clinical diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. Then we get an MRI of your brain to image your brain and see what it looks like. What we're looking for is anything else that may be contributing to the memory loss. Do you have a stroke, a brain tumor? Did you fall and hit your head? Is there bleeding brain? So we get an MRI scan before we start this process. Then the next step that we do is we get what's called a PET scan. Yeah, like, your pet, PET, a PET scan. Now, these are scans of your brain, and they tell us what kinds of dementia you have, whether it's the Alzheimer's disease, is it frontal temporal dementia? They all have different patterns. Now, people say, well, how does a PET scan work? It's kind of a CAT scan thing, the X-ray machine. What they do is they get sugar. Now, you got to understand something. The brain loves sugar. The brain lives off sugar. The brain does, when you get brain food, they talk about brain food. But what the brain really burns all day is sugar. It doesn't burn fat and all this, it burns sugar. So what you do is you get some sugar, you put a little bit of a small amount of radioactive material, and you see where it goes up in the brain, what gets uptaked. And there's different ways of kind of doing it. But what you look at, where are the hot spots? Are the temporal lobes hot or cold? Are the frontal lobes hot or cold? These are all part of the PET scan process. Now, you've heard of PET scans for the body, but you haven't heard much about PET scans for the brain. And that's because there's a very good reason. The government would not pay for PET scans of the brain, not for the diagnosis of Alzheimer's, until this new drug came out. So as of until about 2 to 3 weeks ago, the government refused to pay for PET scans. Medicare refused to pay, and the insurance companies wouldn't pay either, except under protocols, research protocols, or real extraordinary circumstances. So the reason you haven't heard about it is because nobody was willing to pay for it, but now they are. The government is reimbursing companies for doing these scans, and so now I can get them for my patients. So a patient comes to me, I do a clinical exam, I take a history, I ask them some questions, test their memory, and I believe they have Alzheimer's disease. I get an MRI scan to make sure there's no brain tumors or anything like that. It comes back either negative. Oftentimes, early in the Alzheimer's, the brain scans come back normal. So because the temporal lobes have not yet begun to deteriorate significantly. And then you move on to getting a PET scan so that you can image the brain and prove that what's going on in the brain is actually Alzheimer's disease. So then you get that, and then you've got the basis. Then what I do is I register the patients. They have Medicare set up a website that we go to and register our patients for who have Alzheimer's disease, who we want to put on the new drug. It doesn't take long. It's about a 10 or 15-minute process, and we can get the patient, once they're registered, they're registered. Basically, the government wants to keep track of who's on the drug, and particularly for the Medicare patients. So that's what we do. Now, I'll also say that in California, we have a statewide registry for all neurodegenerative disorders. So anybody that comes in my office with Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or anything else is in a statewide registry, but that's because I live in California. Okay, this is something that the state legislature does here. Out of state probably doesn't do it, but anyway, that's what happens. So we register, we've done the MRI scan, we've done, first of all, clinical history, we've got an MRI scan, then we've got the PET scan, and then we're kind of good to go. Okay, and then we can start the drug if we find that you are early in the disease. In other words, there's some weeds there for us to pull out, but it's not so many weeds that when we pull them out, your brain's going to go to mush. Okay, remember that analogy. We've all taken care of lawns before at one point in time, and you do it. You work early and you work hard if to really enjoy it, and that's what we're really talking about here, is getting in at the early stages. So you go in, and every 2 weeks you come. Like we're administrating it now in my office here. I'm about 10 minutes from the Kensington Sierra Madre. I'm in a city called Arcadia, which is next door. We have them infusing. We have an infusion company infusing the patients in my medical office building, and they're there for about an hour, and they get it approximately every 2 weeks. Okay, so they're coming in twice a month to get it, and the plan is that you'll get infused for a year, and then that's given a good chance for the antibodies to come in and remove your weeds. So we've cleaned it out for you, and then after that there isn't really a protocol after that. It's just the 1 year, but it is 1 year, and it is basically every 2 weeks to come in and get infused. It takes about an hour. You just sit in a chair, it runs in your arm, and then you go home. Now, people say, well, the whole idea of getting rid of these neurofibrillary tanks, and we've got to catch it early, right? Which means when you start to lose your memory, when you can't remember where the car keys are, when you can't do this, that's when you go to the neurologist. You don't wait to the point where people are getting lost and wandering the streets and in a moderate to more severe stages. You do it early, and that's what it's all about. Now, the clinical studies that you see here, and I actually have the package insert from the company. Let's let you know, is that's a package insert from the company. What I got a copy of it, brought it in. It's all about early detection, early treatment. Okay. So as far as the Alzheimer's goes, that's it. Now, during the course of the year, you'll probably end up getting 4 MRI scans. That's just to follow along for the progress of your brain. And when we get these MRIs, we're looking for any swelling in the brain, any bleeding in the brain, anything else which could occur. Now, remember, in the studies, the people who had the problems, most of the people who had the stroke-like symptoms were people who were on blood thinners. And I mean the Pixadan, the heavier stuff that you get when you've had blood clots in your legs, blood clots in your lungs. Those are the people that have the most risk for hemorrhaging and bleeding. Not somebody on a baby aspirin, but somebody who's more significant than that. But remember, you will have to tell your physician about all the supplements that you're on, just in case some of them may have maybe unknown to yourself a blood thinner. So that's what we're working on for those patients to identify them and then remove the blood clots. Remove the neurofibrillary tangles, take the weeds out. Now, the exciting thing about this is the first of several. There's 3 or 4 more drugs similarly acting who are following along behind this. So what we've done is we finally got a treatment that works. We're opening the doors, allowing other drug companies to come in with products that work similar or slightly different. So we finally got an effective way to start treating this disease. I'm going to give you another analogy. When I came into practice, there's an entity called multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis, okay? And when I first came in practice in 1980, all we had was steroids. Well, now we have 25 different treatments, 25 different ways of, some with infusion, some with pills, back and forth for treating multiple sclerosis. I predict that as the years go by, we'll have now more and more ways to for memory loss is that when you hit about 90, about half the people have some form of dementia. So my goal is I like to keep my mind, my brain, so that I can enjoy my grandchildren and go to their weddings. I have a 7-year-old granddaughter, 5-year-old granddaughter, and a 2.5-year-old grandson, and I'd like to go to their weddings and dance at their weddings. And it's going to that takes a while, right? Not a while. So that's my goal, but I want to be not just physically there, but mentally there to enjoy it and reminisce about what they were like when they were young. So that's part of my strong interest as a neurologist. Wow, so we've talked a lot about what the drug is. Now, I have to say to you that I'm a neurologist in the community. I'm not being paid by the drug manufacturer. I don't have any conflict of interest there. I have an infusion center set up in the building I work in, so we infuse our own patients as they come in. I wanted to go over a little bit about the side effects that they actually list here. And most people with this do not have side effects from the medication. The vast majority do not. Everybody gets a little bit of swelling in the brain, as would be expected as you're pulling stuff out, right? So you're going to get a little bit of swelling in the brain, but that's to be expected. But most people do not have side effects. The side effects that people get are headaches, confusion, dizziness, visual changes, nausea, walking, and they can get a seizure as well. So I'll be doing some screening for my patients for seizures to be sure about that. But the vast majority of the people will not do that as long as they're not on heavy-duty blood thinners. Okay, so it's called Leqembi, excuse me. It's also, the generic is lecanemide. You may hear that C, lecanemab. Excuse me, that's the generic. All right, so that's the prescription for it. It's given every 2 weeks and it's an IV. It takes about an hour of your time. They come in and they infuse and then you go home. And as I said, you anticipate about 4 MRI scans during the year, 1 PET scan to make the diagnosis. Now, if you can't for some reason do a PET scan, remember it's a CAT scan machine they put you into, so you don't have to worry about your pacemaker. If you, for any reason, you can't do the PET scan, you can still do it by doing a lumbar puncture and checking your spinal fluid to see if they have the appropriate markers for Alzheimer's. But most of us would prefer not to have a needle in our back, so we're trying to encourage everybody to get a PET scan. Remember, a PET scan is done with a CAT scan machine and the special sugar, so it's not an MRI. You don't have to worry about your pacemaker. So that's a good thing there. Oh, also, there's a special warning here about pregnancy. I don't have a lot of my patients with Alzheimer's who are pregnant, but it is there. It lets you know, and breastfeeding and pregnancy, they want to say they're not sure if you should be doing that at the same time. Which, as I said, is most of my patients, we don't have to, most of us off Medicare, we're not worried about that. But I'm just letting you know that. Now, the other thing is, of course, like any medicine, you could become allergic. And if you do, and you start to break out with a rash or swelling in your face or fevers and stuff like that, they'd have to stop the medicine, okay? And then, but that's the kind of thing you get with any infusion. So, so that's kind of what the package insert has. They sort of saved you the bother of reading that, so you kind of get a little view on that. So let's see, what time? Oh, I'm almost 23 minutes. A few more minutes. I wanted to say just a few things about this. The biggest question that people are going to have is, do I qualify? Does my spouse qualify? That's what everybody's going to ask. And I said, if you're, the studies have proven it works in people who are in early stages. And the early stage person is the one who walks into the office with a family. They're getting forgetful. They're leaving the car keys behind. They're forgetting what they're supposed to be doing. But they're not in a wheelchair. They're not in a nursing home. They're not curled up in a ball, unable to respond. They haven't stopped talking, things like that. So remember, the advanced people have too much. When you start taking all the weeds out, it rips up the rest of the brain. You know what I'm saying with that analogy? Sorry. But that's how I envision it. So it's for the early stages of it. Now they're doing studies. They did the studies on the early stages. Now they're doing studies on what they call moderate stage to see if that will prove to work. Those studies are currently ongoing. I talked to the manufacturer about it. They're ongoing. So they haven't proven to the FDA that it works in the middle stages, but they're working on it. They're doing studies, and they hope to come up with some published data to prove it. Now, this is not an experimental drug. This has completed all the FDA-approved studies. It did all. It's just standard of care now. It's just like any other medicine that's been brought on. It's not experimental. This drug is not experimental. It's now part of the treatment regime. Okay, so I want everybody to understand it's not experimental. There are still ongoing experiments for different forms of Alzheimer's. Different drug manufacturers are doing the studies. Like Leqembi, people themselves are doing for moderate stage. So there's people still enrolling in drug studies, and they're still ongoing and should be. Remember, this is the first one that's found that works and is found to be effective and is relatively safe. But I expect over the next 10 to 15 years, you're going to have 25 choices, just like you have for multiple sclerosis. Okay. This is one of those things where you say what you want about drug companies, about, oh my God, the cost of drugs, blah, 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 blah. Well, those of us who are getting older and facing, like all of us, the 50-50 chance of memory loss, this is where we're going to get some of our money back. We're gonna want to get these new medicines so that we can enjoy our grandchildren and the golden years.
I'm on the same page with that, Dr. Wogensen.
There is a registry with Medicare. It doesn't take long, about 10 minutes to register our patient, because Medicare wants to keep track of everybody. And I don't blame them for that, to see what's going on. Once we get up and running, I expect that we've already started infusing people in my office. We've had our second or third patient who's now had their infusion. So far, everything's running fine. So I'm exceedingly excited to be going to work. Okay, TGIM, thank God it's Monday. I get to go back and work with some people and save some people and stuff like that. There's nothing like the idea that I can give somebody their husband or wife back. You know, people have been married for 50 years, can't recognize them, and I could give them back their loved one for another, who knows, 10, 20 years, you know. This thrills to death. This makes my day. So I enjoy going to work on things, okay? And I'm very enthusiastic about that. And I see strong working relationships with memory care centers such as the Kensington in terms of helping our patients. But remember, this is one of many to follow, okay? So I'm very enthused, excited. Let me see, what are we at? We're at 26 minutes. Was there
we have a bunch of questions and questions that were submitted previously, but one question, I love your analogies. I love the weed analogy, and I love the indication of the promising future as multiple sclerosis. Do you see, because everyone's brain is wired so differently, different drugs for different genotypes or different people with a different genetic makeup, or do you think it'll just be one drug treating different forms and different stages?
Well, I see multiple drugs for multiple stages. We're going to get specific. There's going to be say, well, if you have this genotype, you're this one best. And if you have that genotype, it works best for you. This is all going to develop out. This is all going to be over the next 10 to 15 years. You're going to have people drawing. You can draw, we are aware that there is a familial, some people get spontaneous Alzheimer's. Some people it runs in the families. If you happen to carry the genome for it, just like breast cancer can sometimes run in the families for women. And they test for that. Now they're at the point where they're testing the genome to see if you have the gene that will make it likely for you to develop breast cancer. And if so, you're carefully watched. We'll probably be doing that much, much more with the Alzheimer's patients. And people, as we get older, we'll start screening everybody, because why spend your last days in a nursing home when if you get the medicine, you can be with your family? Exactly. Medicare is paying for the drug. They're paying for the scans. They're paying for everything else. This is where you're going to get all those taxes you paid all the years, you're going to get your money back. For those of us who are going to remain around, I mean, we all plan on living to be 100. We don't all make it, but we'd all like to be there. But if I'm going to be 100, I want to be able to recognize family, friends, and everything else. Okay, next question, go ahead.
Which is another question about the age, the appropriate age to start a drug like this. A question came in at our registration that her father's 90 and is exhibiting signs. Is there some type of an age gap that?
Nope. If you're 50 or 60, it can sometimes hit you. If you're starting to get in the early stages of Alzheimer's, you get yourself a PET, you get your MRI scan first. First of all, you've seen a neurologist, they've talked about what's going on. We've made sure it isn't because you're not sleeping, it's because you're having side effects of medications. I mean, people can have memory problems or whatever, like if they're not sleeping at night because they have a sleep disorder. We have to diagnose all this stuff. But if it's truly Alzheimer's, we've got a PET scan to prove this Alzheimer's. It's early. It doesn't matter what age you are. You can be 100 if you want to and take this drug.
Okay.
Particularly if you're planning on living to be 110, who knows, right? I mean, if we really get this Alzheimer's under control, many of us will make 100.
Well, that would be great, because then I'll be at my grandchildren's weddings. So
well,
I'm right
of
there.
Course,
I'm there with you.
I'm just a young 67 now, and I need what, 20 years or so, 87. I got to be in my 90s, but I want to be I want to go to their weddings
and dance. I like that.
And the dance. I want to dance at the weddings of my grandchildren. Yes.
Yes. So I've heard some conversation about a blood test for Alzheimer's. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. They've talked about looking for markers in the blood. It's kind of a bit of hit and miss. It could be, it's hit and miss. The PET scan is very specific. The lumbar puncture, either you have the stuff or you don't, because you're looking right at the spinal fluid that's bathing the brain. But you got to remember, there's a barrier between your blood and your brain. It's called the blood-brain barrier. And it's set up so that stuff in the blood doesn't easily get up into the brain. Well, stuff in the brain doesn't necessarily get down into the blood because you have the blood-brain barrier. So it's hit and miss, the accuracy of that stuff. I don't personally think it's accurate enough to make the diagnosis. So my patients will get a PET scan or they're going to get a lumbar puncture, because that way the spinal fluid is supposed to bathe in the brain, right? But that's why I don't have that much faith in the blood test yet. Now you could prove me wrong later, but the number one thing will be the PET scan. The number two thing would be the lumbar puncture to get the spinal fluid. Like the women, when they get their epidurals, you just go a little deeper and take some fluid out. So that's what I'm thinking. As I said, some people may argue more for the blood tests. Obviously, it's convenient to get a blood test. But right now, I'm looking for that PET scan to really show, okay, here it is. Because I forgot to mention one thing. You can have more than one disease. Those of us who are on Medicare, no, you can have more than one problem. You can have hypertension and diabetes. You can have hypertension, diabetes, and bad knees. You can have multiple medical conditions. Well, you can have multiple forms of dementia. You can have Alzheimer's, but also have multiple infarct dementia, stroke dementia. By the way, the word Alzheimer's is named after the neurologist, Dr. Alzheimer, who first described it. And then there's a word for multiple stroke dementia, and it was Dr. Binswanger, so we call it Binswanger's disease, okay? And then there's Lewy body disease, which is the third most common form behind Alzheimer's and multiple stroke. It would be it's Lewy body disease. And that's where you get a lot of behavioral changes and stuff before, and then some Parkinsonian-like symptoms. stiffness, rigidity, and then the memory loss. That's Lewy body disease. That's sort of a nit thing. So that's separate and different. And you can have more than one. So what we're going to find is we're going to scan people and find when you've got, your dementia is 40% multiple infarcts and 60% Alzheimer's. That's what we're going to get to that point. The scans will become more sophisticated as we are now allowed to bill for them, and the government will come up with more and more scans. And so we're going to find it's a bit of a mixed picture. That's why, even though we have a treatment for Alzheimer's, Alzheimer's won't stop multiple stroke dementia. So if you're smoking, drinking, high cholesterol foods, and you're starting to have mini strokes in your brain, this medicine is not going to help you. All right, you still got to take really good care of yourself. It came out past 10 or 15 years that people who follow all the good heart guidelines, they eat right, they go to bed at night, they don't smoke, they don't drink, they exercise, they keep their cholesterol under control. They had a lot less dementia because they were having, because they're preventing the multiple stroke dementia.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Understood.
so that's why you still got to take care of yourself, even though you're doing this. Okay, what's your next question? Sorry.
I was a little disappointed at the beginning of the presentation that this drug won't work for Parkinson's or Lewy body. Do you think in that multiple sclerosis scenario, the 25 drugs to come, there'll be something specifically targeted for those dementia diseases?
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, you have to understand the cup's always half full for me. It's never half empty. I'm an optimist by nature. I hope all my optimism doesn't overflow and distort your vision. But if I'm an optimist, that will come over time and have better things. But we've waited so many years for this breakthrough now to show these monoclonal antibodies. We're just so excited. I mean, but right now, no, I can't help you if you've got Lewy body. I mean, all I can do is symptomatic treatment. I can't stop the course of the disease. And this is something we're really going to be rolling back the clock, giving people another 8 to 10 years. And then, of course, if you get 8 more years with this drug, there's got to be, more drugs like it that'll come along. We may get to the point where, we're going to help a lot of people. But right now, I don't want to give any false hope about the Lewy body right now. I don't have a cure for that, or the frontal temporal dementia. The frontal temporal dementia pops up because people lose frontal lobe. That's judgment. And then sometimes speech. So that's the kind of dementia where people you get a businessman who's been very sharp, very accurate with their life, always made the right decisions. Now they're like saying and doing silly things, stupid things, acting like they're suddenly the person who's been reasonable their whole life is now perceived as being racist or something. And it turns out they have frontal temporal dementia. And we had a very prominent businessman here in LA who was owned a basketball team for a while, and he was a very sharp businessman, and the sharpest as they get, one of the best minds in business in the whole area. And he built these empires up, and suddenly he just stopped making racist statements, doing absurd things, and the behavior was just so strange. And then eventually, it was public knowledge, but he was found to have frontal temporal dementia. So basically, they took away his license. He was no longer able to do things. But that's another form of dementia. I'm being a neurologist. I watch all this, see how it all unfolds around me. I'm sorry. Next question.
So my father passed away from Alzheimer's, and I'm just going to do a scenario for you. I love your scenarios, especially about the weeds. So if let's just say that this happened 10 years ago, and I came to you, and he started these infusions when he was just mild in his, early stages. When you say 8 to 10 years, would he just have remained there? Would he have gotten better? What is like the percentage? Do you have a percentage of how it can help people with the early stage?
Well, the data shows definite clinical improvement. What we need to do is do 1 million people and then give you the numbers from that.
And how many?
I understand that question. You want the hard, like how much better and how much longer will
40%, 50%, yeah.
Yeah, I know. Well, they have the studies that show that, you're talking about 70–80% of the people benefiting from the medication. What we need to do, though, is these studies have shown it works. Now we need to do 1 million people, and then they'll do studies on all that, and they'll continue doing the studies, and they'll give you numbers. Like 5 years from now, they'll tell you exactly what the percentages are. And they'll also break it down based upon the genetics, too.
Mm-hmm.
they'll say, well, because you have this distortion in your genome, you're more likely to get Alzheimer's. It's interesting because people would come to me and say, my father has this genetic thing that leads to Alzheimer's. Should we get tested? And I said, before in the past, I'd say, well, what you mean? So you want to know? I mean, I never encourage my patients to go out and get tested because how are they going to live their lives knowing they've got this? You know what I'm saying? If they have the chromosome abnormality, how do you live your life? You suddenly, you know what I'm saying? Because there's nothing in the past I could do about it. You know what I'm saying? So why would I put you in all that stress when there's nothing I could do? But now what I would say is if you have an effective treatment for the disease, just like, that, and you have a genetic abnormality, let's watch you. Let's get occasional PET scans and count the weeds in your head. And when it gets to be too many, when it gets enough, we'll take them out. So now that I have an effective treatment, I'm much more open to people doing follow-ups with checking for genetic predispositions. Just like women whose mothers have had breast cancers who have unique forms of genetic mutation, and to see if they have it or not, because there's something you can do. You can monitor them, you can watch them. And so that's what I think. It's going to be a tremendous way of just treating this illness. Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead. Did I answer your question?
You did. And I'd like to make a distinction for the audience of early stage Alzheimer's and early onset. There was the question that came up, and early onset is when you start being symptomatic of Alzheimer's early in your 50s or earlier than that. So would this disease also help early onset in the early stages?
I understand. When I was trained at the Veterans Hospital in Long Beach. There's a second largest VA in the country there, and we happened to get a young man in who was 40, who had all the signs of Alzheimer's disease. And we said, "Oh my God!" And we actually did a brain biopsy and found he truly had Alzheimer's disease at age 40. That would be what they call, young onset, right? Young disease. So I suspect that person would benefit every bit as much as somebody who's 80 doing it. Okay. So it'd be an early stage of disease and early onset. Early onset is catching it at 40. If you come down with the symptoms in 90, that's not early onset. But then we want to catch you in the early stages of the disease so we can pull the weeds out. Okay, and get rid of the weeds and clear it back out.
Make that lawn pristine.
Yeah, get that lawn going again. Get a nice green dichondra lawn again. Get it all back out there. Keep it going. But it's maintenance. You got to get your congressmen to remind them that you want them to do this and to fund this because, I'm on Medicare. I know I paid extra for my Part D for this, but you want to encourage your congressmen to make sure that there's funding for us. They want our votes, right?
Yep.
Well, maybe they earn them.
Yep.
I tell my congressman all the time, if you're not going to fund Alzheimer's disease research, if you're not going to perform from this, I want somebody who will. So I think we need to be kind of firm with our congressional members of Congress about that.
I would agree.
This is a federal program. Yeah. They've got to fund this for us, guys. You can't let them walk away and say it's too expensive. Now, the drug costs about $25,000 to $30,000 a year. There's an administration cost. But of course, when Alzheimer's, and we could buy this in bulk, and get the price down, but it's not millions of dollars per person. It's something, and besides prolonging life and getting people more productive life. Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, that's what it's all about, right? I mean, we want quality, not just quantity.
Yep.
We want quality to our lives. We want good quality. And this is a quality issue. Next question.
We want dancing in the half cup full.
Yeah, half cup full, yeah.
Yep. What if you're not on Medicare? Will insurance cover?
Yes, you only want Medicare. Yes, it does. It kind of has to, because most of the insurance policies have to cover if the government covers something, they have to cover it. That's the way it usually works. I can't say for every little insurance policy out there because God knows how many there are. But if you're talking to Blue Cross, Blue Shield, the biggies, they're going to pay for it. But you have to see what the drug plan is. See, the best policy is to have your Medicare take care of this for you. Okay, and the government will insist that it be done. So, I get some people have, in their 50s have very good insurance, but they don't have good drug benefits. I'm a little like I'm going to have to see how this all works out for people who come down with it in their 50s. But Most people, though, as you said, once you hit 65, I mean, it's the greatest thing we have going as seniors, is to do this. And then, so yeah, there's some insurance plans that are just really weak. I mean, they don't do much. So
Yeah.
don't know everything. Go ahead. What's the question?
Our audience would like for you to revisit two things: revisit the side effects, and I don't think the side effects when I heard you talking, headache and mostly from the infusion, are that great. And then also, what happens post year one?
Okay, let me talk about post year one. We're gonna the whole thing is that we've spent a year clearing out the weeds. We're just gonna observe you from that point on and see how you do. There isn't like a protocol like after the first year. Okay, the treatment goes on for 1 year. We've cleaned you out, gotten rid of all your weeds, and then we're going to see how people do. Because what we have to do is do ongoing clinical studies to see what we do. Does that mean at year 3 we need to put you back into the protocol and clear, right? If you start to get more weeds, do we need to do it? That's open for, we don't know. The protocol is 1 year. Every 2 weeks, infuse you for an hour, clear the weeds out, and then appreciate the benefits. And then your question is, well, will the weeds reoccur? Well, we're going to have to wait and see on that, and how soon. I suspect that it's going to keep us cleaned up for quite some time, and enough to enjoy the length of the another 7 or 8 years of adding on quality of life. So, and then during that time, other meds will come along. I mean, other drugs will come along in this class now that we've opened the door. But I don't have a good question. I mean, the question is, after the first year, that's it. Then we just see how you do. That's what we do. And then, I'm sorry, side effects. Okay, I actually got out and I was reading to you the side effects from the package insert. I might have mentioned this before, but I'm not a paid spokesman for the company. I'm just a doctor in the community. So I went ahead and got there and read their side effects. But if you're not on blood thinners, you've got a 96-97% chance. All you're going to get is an occasional headache, a little blurred vision, things like that. However, if you are on blood thinners like Apixaban and stuff like that, or Eliquis, or some of these heavy duty stuff, that's where you're going to have some risks involved. And then you're going to have to do a risk versus benefits analysis with your physician. Is it risky enough? Should I do this? Okay. Now, you have to remember also that those of us who are going to be on the drug are going to be on Medicare age for the most part. They sometimes have strokes because they were going to have a stroke anyway, right? I mean, even without Alzheimer's, they never had it. They were destined to have a stroke just because that's the way it was going to be. So those people can still having those kinds of strokes. So that's the big thing. There was another drug that came out a year or two before this, but it was too risky. Its side effects were too great, and the government said no. And a lot of major centers said no, but they're saying yes on this one because of the safety profile. Next question.
A few people have asked what supplements are blood thinners.
Oh, what are supplements or blood thinners? A blood thinner is Coumadin. Okay. If you had a clot in your heart, in your leg, that went up into your lung, and you went to see your doctor, he probably put you on a blood thinner so you wouldn't do more, right? Because clots that get up, they go from your leg into your lung, we call that a pulmonary emboli. Sometimes they're fatal. So people die of them all the time. We don't want that to happen. So then they put you on Coumadin, or they sometimes more of the newer drugs. Eliquis, they've got the golfers with Arnold Palmer talking about how he's been on Eliquis for years. You see the commercials, like a bunch of older people saying, yeah, I've been on this drug for years. And then the nice thing about these new drugs is they have fewer side effects in terms of bleeding and stuff. Coumadin, I was on that after I got a clot after a broken leg. You have to be very careful what vegetables you ate and what your diet was, because the Coumadin would interact with whatever you were eating. And so you had to change your Coumadin dose based on how much vegetables you have. You don't have to do that with the new drugs. You just take the newer drugs. Nobody cares. It doesn't have anything to do with what you're eating. So they're great. I mean, I'm in favor of the Eliquis, the newer drugs, the Apixabans. Now, that's what I'm talking about, okay? If you've had a blood clot and they put you on blood thinners, then you're in that risk, okay? If you want to do this drug, because when they pull the weeds out, you're going to bleed into the hole, okay? That's what's going to happen. Should you do it? I'm not saying you shouldn't, but I'm just saying you're in that riskier group, and you got to be keeping an eye on things. Okay, and now I'm sorry. What was the next question?
supplements, over-the-counter
Yeah.
supplements that thin your
I
blood?
get people occasionally who are not on any quote prescription medication, but they're taking supplements. They're doing aloe vera out of their garden. They're cutting up vegetables, and they're doing Chinese herbs, and they're doing stuff. And I've had people come in with strokes, bleeding out, and we can't stop the bleeding. And we find out that the supplements they were taking caused thinning of the blood. And we're like, oh, why isn't the blood stopping? Why is the blood everywhere? Why is this? But then we find the family say, oh, they're on blah, 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 blah. So now if people are doing serious herbs and things like that, they need to have an herbalist who will warn them about that. You got to say, if I'm doing these herbs, you better start doing your research. And is this going to thin my blood? Because remember, thin blood and pulling weeds out of your head means bleeding. Okay, that means strokes in the brain. So if you're a supplement, now in LA County where I practice, it's like half the people do supplements. They've got their vitamins, they've got their vitamin C, and they assure me, and it's kind of interesting. I'm just used to everybody. Half my patients can tell me if I say what supplements you're on. Oh, I'm on flaxseed oil, and I'm on honey, virgin honeybees, and I do this, and I'm like, okay. In California, we have a law of buyer beware. So if you want to, no one will stop you from buying supplements in California for your health. You can buy lethal amounts at the store. Nobody will stop you, okay? I can't prescribe lethal amounts of medicines. The pharmacy would stop me. The computer systems would say, oh, you can't do that, doctor. Those drugs and those drugs don't match. You can't do it. They would block it. There's all these safeguards intact, but you can go and buy a fatal amount of supplements at the store and to go home and take them and die, and no one will stop you. It's called
the interaction. Yeah,
the interactions. Yeah, go ahead. Next question.
Well, clearly, you have a lot of fans out there,
Okay.
because some guests have asked if you can do telehealth appointments for people in Virginia.
I can't practice. Oh, that's a good point. I can't practice over state lines. During COVID, they let doctors practice all over the country. But now that the COVID emergency is officially over, the answer is no, I can't. I can't. The only way I can talk to somebody in Virginia is if I have a Virginia state medical license, which I don't have. So I was working full time during COVID, and I had people who would see me he'd be from here, their relatives would call me. I had people all over the country I was treating for different illnesses, but not anymore, because literally have to have a state license. I'd have a Virginia license to do a telehealth in Virginia. Now I can talk to people like this, nobody cares, but I'm not like prescribing specific medications. But that ended with the COVID. When you remember the COVID emergency is officially over, and all those rules that allowed us to do that have basically stopped. A lot of the insurance companies are cutting back on compensation for telehealth. So I hope that kind of explains.
That answers the question.
Yeah.
Another question, does a neurologist have to diagnose, or can a doctor diagnose, and can I just fast forward the process and go directly to a PET scan?
Well, that's fascinating. Okay. First of all, PET scans are expensive, so someone's gonna want to challenge we have to demonstrate to the government that we've at least done a history and physical and done some stuff, because they're expensive tests. So when I put in a request for a PET scan, I have to send the medical records to the scanner, and they've got to log in, and they've got to fill out forms for the government to say that we've checked all the boxes, that we've done MRI scans, that we've done history, that there's a history here. Now, your neurologist is the one who's trained to do this. Can other physicians do it if they want to do it? There's no law that says, I have a medical license that says I'm a physician and surgeon. It says on it physician and surgeon, but you're not going to have me take out your appendix. I haven't done that since med school. Now, I got to be honest with you. You want to have somebody who does this, who does it a lot, who's like anything else. If you're going to get your carburetor changed in your car, heck, go to somebody who fixes carburetors, okay? Go to some place that does if you're going to go get new tires for your car, go to the dealer or go to somebody who does tires. That's my attitude. I don't care if you have a neurologist or something, but if you have somebody that's doing it a lot, has trained and learned about it, that's fine with me. Just somebody who does a lot of it, okay? Because I don't want you being put on a medicine and you don't even have the disease, okay? I don't want you getting this stuff, getting side effects, and then they say, oh, by the way, you never really had Alzheimer's, but you've got swelling in the brain, you've got these other side effects because you didn't have it, okay? So I'm a little leery when I say, okay, don't see a neurologist. Just have your family doctor do it. Your family doctor's got a lot on his plate right now, in case you hadn't noticed. Now all the patients are going to come to the family doctor. Do you think I have early Alzheimer's disease? And they're going to want to refer them on to people like myself to evaluate them and run them through the process. So family physicians are just overwhelmed right now, just doing what they're doing. Now we're saying, oh, I had one family doctor say, you mean all my patients with memory loss should now be screened for Alzheimer's? They said, well, yeah, just send them over. We'll look at them. I said, well, great. I'm just going to send you a third of my patients and let you take a look at them and see what you think. And he was only half kidding because, you know, it's a common thing. Because all the things, now the family doctor is going to ask about, are you sleeping at night? What about your medicines? What about, you know, do you have diabetes? He's going to check you for this stuff first. So I'm all about it takes a village, a team of people to do all this. And if you think that I think there's enough neurologists to go around and take care of everybody who might have early Alzheimer's, the answer is no, there isn't. But so we're going to have to do the best we can. There'll be nurse practitioners who will get expertise in this. We're going to be who become Alzheimer's nurse practitioner experts. I predict this all. You'll have like I worked with a nurse practitioner with one of the groups who's an expert in MS, and she helps the MS patients. Well, I predict there'll be nurse practitioners who will specialize in Alzheimer's who will be very tuned into this. So you can get the knowledge and wisdom. It's not like, you know, out of the way. So yeah, but will the family doctors want to take the responsibility of filling out all the forms, doing the paperwork, doing the registries, making sure everything's done the way it's supposed to be done? They're busy. Well, you know, try to get into your family doctor and find out how long that takes, right? I mean, you know. So right now, it would be good if you get a neurologist who's been trained in these diseases and who's specifically for this. Now, I hope I answered that question. What's the next question?
You did answer that. And then a follow-up question to that is this being used internationally?
Oh, good question. Well, there are ongoing studies in Japan. There's ongoing studies in Europe with this drug and similar other drugs that they want to bring to the market. But remember, this monoclonal antibody thing is something that came sort of, it's a combination of companies that came together to do this. So it's kind of like, there's a lot of international interest all over the world, obviously treating this disease. Now, Europe is being disrupted by a war. You may be well aware of the Ukraine-Russian war, but without it, they would undoubtedly be, you know, very much involved with that. But right now, they're kind of doing other things. People in Africa won't be treated for this probably very much because of their other geopolitical things that are going on there. I mean, it takes a focus to do this. But there are other people who are studying the same issue all over the world, yes.
Have you ever heard of, and I'll try to pronounce this, Simufilin, SIMUFILAM, which is now in phase 3 trials?
Oh, well, I shouldn't comment much on phase 3 trial drugs because I know of about half a dozen of them that people are doing. With phase 3 is when you're really kind of getting you're doing the studies where you're giving it to people and seeing how they do. You know, the phase 1s are safety, the phase 2s are safety with, first of all, you prove it's a safe drug on animals, then you prove it's a safe drug on humans, and then the next thing is you actually prove that it works in humans. That's sort of your phase. I'm simplifying. But the first thing is you prove it's safe in animals to give this drug. Then you prove that it's safe to give it to humans. Then you prove that it actually works. So the phase 3s are getting more into it actually works. Do I know of people doing this? Yes. There's a number of companies who have similar approaches and slightly varying approaches to this. Now, you got to remember, for years and years, all the Alzheimer's treatments failed. I mean, it's billions of dollars spent on trying to come up with it until this novel approach came. It's just like billions of dollars. Now, was it wasted? Well, if you were the guy writing the checks, you'd think it was wasted, I guess, if you invested millions of dollars and got nothing back, except, oh, it doesn't work or it's unsafe. So the fact that we've got other people doing it, I'm all in favor of it. As I said, this is number one. I have, in the next 10 or 15 years, there'll be 25 of them. That's what I expect. Right. So yeah, but I want them all to come on, and then we're going to get specific about this and that. Okay, what's the next question?
One last question, but I want to remind the audience that everyone who registered for the event today will receive a copy of the webinar to share with friends and family, and I suspect probably watch again, so that you can contact your family doctor or a neurologist with appropriate questions or
Sure.
answers to the questions they're going to ask, because this has been super helpful. Last question is, I have heard that anxiety and depression are precursors into someone having symptoms of mild cognitive impairment. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, probably I could do about an hour on that. I'm trying to cut it down to like 2 minutes because you want something short. If you got an hour, we could talk all about how some of the first things that mess up in your brain are your sleep. When you get sick, the first thing that messes up is your sleep. You don't sleep, you don't get the deep sleep, you don't get the rested sleep. So then you get this restless sleep when you're sick. And I remember, so that's part of the deal, is that people are, when they would start to become ill, they don't sleep well at night. And when you don't sleep well at night, the brain doesn't get a chance to rest. So it leads to anxiety and depression, okay? Now, I use an Apple Watch to track my sleep because I think sleep is very important. I got my Apple Watch on and I got my phone. And so I charge them up every night and I track my sleep at night, okay? Now, when I got COVID, and I did have it, I got the COVID earlier this year and I stayed home for a week. I thought, okay, great. I get to watch all my TV because I'm COVID positive. I don't have to see anybody doing it. I'm just going to I'm going to binge watch all my Netflix. I'm going to just sit back and, and I couldn't do it because it disrupted my sleep. The COVID made it, when I was sick with COVID, even though it was not life-threatening, because, I'd been on the vaccine, it disrupted my sleep. And I could see that I wasn't getting deep sleep at night. So I was getting moody and irritable and, and I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't remember what happened in the last Netflix episode. This all happens when you're sick, okay? So do I think that people who are having brain changes, whose brains are being altered by Alzheimer's, they don't sleep well at night, they become anxious and depressed? Of course I do. I think that's definitely a sign of sickness, but it can be a sign of multiple stroke dementia, other forms of dementia, or you just got, like in my case, I was just out for a week. Now, the funny thing is, when the COVID passed and I became negative, my sleep went back to normal. I got my 2 to 3 hours of deep sleep. I got to track it all on my Apple Watch. I was back to being a happy camper again. And so I hope that was a strong yes, that sometimes the precursors of clinical Alzheimer's will be anxiety, depression, you can't sleep. Yes.
I'm just going to reiterate to everybody, you said go to your family doctor. If appropriate, next step would be to go see a neurologist, and the neurologist would then give a subjective test, a verbal test, not a blood test or anything like that. Then you have an MRI, and then you have a PET scan.
Yeah.
And then you register for the Medicare drug, and you would do
Your
that.
doctor will register for the Medicare drug, yes.
And I think this is so hopeful, and I just cannot thank you enough, and I can't thank our audience enough for joining us today. Such valuable information to share with friends and family. And thank you to Kensington Senior Living. I know you're there right now. I see the mugs behind you. And say hello. Say hello to the team in Sierra Madre. And I do promise you one thing. I would love to do a webinar with you on anxiety and depression, because I think in our aging population, it really needs to be addressed, and we need to talk about it.
That could be fun, but it would be from a neurologist's perspective. So yeah.
What better than the brain, and what's good for your brain's good for your heart, and vice versa. So I see it's all good.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wogensen. You have a great evening, and thank you everyone for joining us today.